Welcome to the Lady Up America podcast. This is a sidebar that I have called Conversations. I like to sit down with people that I encounter that I think have a lot of wisdom that they can bring to the conversation in this current cultural climate. And my friend Jason Duncan is going to join me today. We're going to talk through the male perspective in this very difficult climate that we're living in. As women, I know a lot of us, we have strong men in our lives, strong conservative men, but what are the challenges that they are facing? What are the things that we could do to support them better as they're trying to navigate this very, very different culture too? So before I bring him in, let me go ahead and introduce you to the real Jason Duncan. He is the founder and CEO of the Exeter Club. This is where entrepreneurs are generating $3 million in revenue, $3 million plus in revenue, implementing a system that lets them own their own businesses as assets instead of being enslaved by them. He's a best-selling author of Exit Without Exiting. He's a two-time TEDx speaker. He's the host of the podcast, The Root of All Success, and he also co-hosts one called Chisel and Compass. He's America's exit coach. He founded 14 companies and he exited 5 of them. He reverse engineered what separates entrepreneurs who build wealth from those who just build jobs. I call it the JOB. That research became XOX, the 7-stage methodology that transitions owner-operators into owner-investors. Clients following his methods have reduced their work hours by 30%, increased productivity by 80%, and boosted business value by 30%. He's been featured in Inc. and in Entrepreneur Magazine. Jason's work empowers entrepreneurs to achieve freedom and autonomy in their businesses. And you know what that does? That gives them a lot more time to do things at home, to do things with kiddos, to do things that they want to be doing instead of being a slave to the job. So please welcome to the show, my friend, Jason Duncan. Hi, Jason.
Hello, Diane. Thank you very much.
Welcome. I'm so excited to sit down and talk with you today. This is a treat because I serve an audience of suburban women, and we're always talking about things that, concern us, but we need to stop for a minute sometimes and consider the men in our lives and the challenges that you are facing. You're a strong conservative Christian, very openly so. So let's dive in and find out. I want to learn more about your heart and then the heart of the men that you are serving, in your businesses. First of all, congratulations on all of your success.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hello, ladies.
They're going to love you. All right, Jason. So before we dive into the deeper stuff, let me just let's get a snapshot of who you are and share with the women what brought you to this point in your career.
Well, I spent the first 13 years of my career, my life, out of high school and through college and the next decade or so, in pastoral ministry. And then after I got absolutely fed up with that machine of doing that, it's like, I got to go somewhere different and make that I can make a difference. I went back to school, got a master's in education, started teaching American history to eighth graders. And I loved it. Thought I would be there teaching school for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And loved it. Loved the craft of teaching. My students performed really well. I was a favorite teacher. It was a dream opportunity for me. But coming out of the Great Recession in 2010, 2011, my principal came to me and said, "Hey, I got some bad news. I can't renew your contract for next year. I've got to cut a couple of teaching positions due to budget cuts." And I didn't have tenure. I was the last guy hired in the building, and that's how they made that decision. And that allowed me an opportunity to look at, new opportunities. And so I ultimately, although it was not my first choice, ultimately made a decision to start a business. And within about 3 years, I became a millionaire, built this huge business, and we were doing projects all over the country. And my life forever changed because of that one decision made by a school board to not renew the contract of one of the best teachers in the county because of budget cuts, and he didn't have tenure. So do I miss teaching? For sure. Would I go back? Absolutely not. I would have been fired during the COVID era. I would never have made it through that crap.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so I went on to start that company, grew it, did really well. And then I found out in 2018 after a year where we had $1 million in profit at the end of the year that my company was not worth anything. It wasn't sellable because I was the center of the business. Everything revolved around me as the owner manager of the company. And I decided I'm not going to let that stop me. So I spent the next 18 months trying to figure out how to get out of the daily operations, and ultimately invented exit without exiting as a concept. And I ended up writing a book about it. And then over the course of the next several years, I started coaching and teaching other people how to do this. And now I've worked with dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs across the country to do the same thing, and even to get ready to sell their businesses if they want.
Wow. So you are still teaching.
Yes,
I think
just differently.
Yes. Once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher. I think that, I think that's really true. You have the heart of a teacher, heart to reach back to people and show them what you've learned and show them the way out of the maze. That's awesome. I did not realize that you had a master's in teaching and that you were, I think the life lesson there that I would take away is there's so much life on the other side of our worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking like the worst thing that could happen to you as you're rising as a teacher would be to lose that position. And I think if we just trust God on the other side, there's that safety net always. And he leads us to bigger and better things if we just stay with him and trust him. Wow.
Yep. Well, it's like David said in Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I don't fear the evil because you're with me.
Right.
And not only that, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And what's the rod and the staff for? The rod is a tool to defend against the enemy. So if the wolves or the bears or whatever, the rod is there to defend, and the staff is to pull me back from doing stupid things. So the staff is to pull me back. So even though we walk through difficult times, our shepherd is there to guide and guard and protect us. And I meditate on that psalm every single day. I had a life coach years ago that told me, he said, the Psalm 23. I said, yeah, I've preached that many sermons, funeral sermons about that. He goes, well, I challenge you. And I was going through a pretty difficult time. He said, just meditate on that every single day, like every day. And so I think probably that's been 6 or 7 years ago. I've almost every day. That's been part of my daily morning routine, is just to go through that line by line and think about what it means. And that's really helped a lot to stabilize me in an otherwise catastrophic situation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We have some similarities there. I did not go to college. I went, but I didn't finish. Life just had a different path for me. I've been in entrepreneurship most of my life since the mid 90s. And I went back and taught it in the women's prison for several years. I would go and teach the women that were within 3 to 5 years of being released. That I would teach them how to build businesses of their own so that when they came out, they could, it's tough for them to get hired on when they have a record. And so the idea was, if we can teach them how to build even small businesses, a dog walking business all the way up to, bricks and mortar, that it would give them choices, give them options when they came out to not have that recidivism and then them end up back in there. And even if they don't have the resources to open their own business, at least it would make them better employees because they would understand the mindset of the owner. And what I saw when I went in there was a bit of a reluctance because I'm so openly Jesus, like Jesus comes with me everywhere I go. And some of the people in that program, they were like, okay, we're going to need you to tone that Jesus down a little bit. And I'm like, no, this is who I am. And I would tell them, I cannot imagine trying to run a business without the wisdom of Jesus every day. We're not smart enough to make those huge life-altering decisions, not only for ourselves, but for employees, for the people that we serve, the colleagues that we encounter. We can't make those decisions without God right in the center, guiding and prompting us. So I just would sense, maybe from what you're saying, that you probably share a lot of your faith with the men that you coach through these entrepreneurial programs that you have, and through your wealth building programs. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, I had, every one of us as business owners has a choice to make when the business is being launched. And whether we consciously go through the decision-making process or we just settled by default, is, do we present this business as a, quote, I'll use the term Christian, as a Christian business, or do we present it just as a business and I happen to be a follower of Christ who owns and leads the business? And I consciously made the decision to do the latter. And the reason I did is because, and it's certainly no offense to anybody who might be listening who chose the former, is that I wanted to make sure that my faith was normalized and that no one would ever look at me with a raised eyebrow. Well, he calls himself Christian business and yet he did X. Because listen, X is going to happen.
Yeah.
In business, whatever X is going to happen. And those of us who are waving a flag, hey, this is a Christian business, you have a much higher level of intolerance from everyone around you. As opposed to the choice that I made was, hey, look, my faith is my faith. I'm never ever going to downplay that, but I'm not positioning myself as leading a Christian mastermind for Christian business owners. That's not what I do. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a decision that I made because now the expectation level isn't there for me to perform in a certain good, godly way. But when I do, they're like, whoa, this is different. Tell me more. So I don't lead. I made a decision not to do that. But with my masterminds, men and women, by the way, but in my mastermind, and 90% of our meetings, I've closed each meeting with prayer, and that they know that I follow Jesus, and I don't make any bones about that. But I'm also not preaching. I'm not showing up and saying, hey, we're gonna do today's scripture is this. But in every one of my newsletters and blogs, there's a proverb. I always put a proverb in every one, and I tie it back into the message. So I think there's a way to normalize your faith and to totally intertwine it with everything that you do without having to label it something. And that's the decision that I made.
There's wisdom in that. And I can see both sides of it. There are a lot of Christian businesses that almost they almost hang that shingle out thinking that that's going to, it can be very deceptive, thinking that that's going to bring them business. Hey, you can trust me, I'm a Christian. They're kind of waving that flag all the time. And you find out underneath, there's really a lot of rotten fruit, Sure. I've seen that a lot too. So I think that's very wise. So the men that you are working with, and I know you work with women too, but I just want to focus on the men today, if we can. For the Christian conservative men, what would be one thing that they wish women knew that they struggle with?
I don't know that my answer has anything specific with Christian conservative. But I would say, what does the man struggle with, and what do the women need to know that's going on inside? And the best illustration of this, I saw a video on Instagram. I think it was Instagram not too long ago, and the way they illustrated it was a little odd, but the point was amazing. And this man, who I presume to be the husband and then the wife, because there were no words in the whole video, he goes up to her and he just puts his hand on her head. And he closes his eyes, and then the next few scenes are all of this. And I'm not gonna. This is gonna sound different than it actually was, but like butterflies and rainbows. It was all like good things, family, snuggling with kids on the couch and cooking dinner, like all the things that you would see like in a warm, womanly, godly woman home. Like that's what he could see in his mind's eye when he touched her head. And then they swapped places, and she touched his head. And she closed her eyes, and what she saw was traffic and horns honking, and him sitting at his desk, rubbing his hot head and screaming out and like, holy crap, I can't believe this is going on. All of the trauma is probably too much of a word, but all of the drama that happens as a man in a business trying to make it and provide for his family. And when she pulled her hand back and was shocked that that's what's going on in his head. And then she sat down and she hugged him and said, look, thank you. She didn't say it, but the idea was, thank you for providing for me. Thank you for doing this. And I think that message is something that I think women need to understand, is that, hey, I don't think for the man who's out earning a living or being the entrepreneur, when the woman is the stay-at-home mom or the homemaker or whatever it happens to be, I don't think they totally understand the struggles that go through. And it could be the opposite direction too. I get it, but we're talking this direction today. I don't think they understand. And I think every once in a while for the woman to come and say, hey, I know how much crap you have to put up with. I know how hard you're working. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I don't think men hear that enough, if at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change the way they show up every day. But if they got that, it
Mm-hmm.
would change the way they show up every day.
I completely agree. I'm married to a wonderful, wonderful man now, but I've been married before a couple times. And my dad was a pastor when I was young. And when he left when I was 8 years old, it really, really impacted me so much. It made it very, very difficult to choose a man. And I grew up in the height of the feminist movement where women were, it was that Helen Reddy song, I am woman, all of the don't ever rely on a man, all that stuff just started getting pumped into me after being in a very structured family for the first 8 years of my life. To go into that, the polar opposite of that, it was very confusing. And I think it was for a lot of women in my generation. On one hand, we're wired by God for that natural relationship with a man where, he is the provider and the protector and the stable one. And you are the one who nurtures and takes care of the family. And I love God's design for family. Now that I've come full circle, I appreciate it even more. Going into that feminist movement where it's all about you don't need a man, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, that whole thing. I want to tell you that pardon my French, it's just crap. It is such a lie from the pit of hell. Every woman that I've ever known, including myself, who went down that path ended up empty and miserable. So now coming back to the emphasis and the appreciation of the nuclear family, and now that I'm in that healthy relationship, and I praise God every day for that. I tell my husband all the time, he's my hero. I even if he goes to take the dog out and he comes in, I'll say, thank you for taking him. Just constantly being mindful of showing appreciation. I don't think we need to be ridiculous about it, but just being mindful of the little things that he does in addition to the big things that he does. And he just will beam, his little face will just light up, and it makes them want to do more for you. I think there's a real need in a man to feel like he's your hero. And I do wish more women, I understand why we went down that path as a culture. I understand that when divorce was breaking up families and it became normalized, that women had to kind of let that independence kick in order to survive. I get that. But I think that now with the return to the nuclear family, that is so needed in our society. How have men navigated this? I mean, it's very tough. I would imagine, from what my husband has told me, and I'd love to hear from you, it's very tough for men to know how to navigate women who had this dichotomy, who have grown up in this feminist movement. How do they navigate that?
I don't know. I think it's a minefield, and no matter where you step, it's probably going to blow up in your face. And it's not fair. It's not the feminist movement has harmed generations of people. Yeah. It's from the pit of hell.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with true value of our worth as individual male or female. It is nothing. All it is a breaking up of the nuclear family and the traditional values that have been around since the beginning of time.
Yes.
The beginning of time. The man was the provider, the protector. He was the one to do that. The woman was the nurturer, to take care of the family. And there is extreme value in both sides because you can't have one without the other. You need both. And the feminist movement, as you just so illustrated, completely broke that apart. So how does a man navigate that? I don't know. It's tough. I'm blessed. I've been married almost 31 years. And I've got a great wife, and that's not an issue for us. We don't have to deal with that. She spent many years working outside the home and many years not working outside the home. And we've had kind of both. And we were blessed that she was able to stay home and be with our kids at this formative years when they needed a mom in the home. And while I was out, making a living. So I don't know how to navigate it. I just think that we need to, I think that the impetus is on the woman. I think that the woman is going to have the awareness to say, you know what, this is kind of backwards. This is insane. We need men, not in the way that the feminists tell us that we shouldn't need men.
Right.
Like that. It's been twisted because they'll take a small truth and they'll twist it. I don't know, honestly, Diane. I don't know how a man navigates that except by being true and authentic and
Mhm.
showing ultimate care. I mean, if you look in scriptures, you see what Paul says to Timothy about, how men, well, I don't know if Paul said to Timothy, but he's saying, women should be submissive. Of course, there's all these arguments about what that means, but
Mhm.
don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to what he says next. Men, husbands, you should love your wives as Christ loved the
Christ
church.
loves the church.
All right,
That's right.
and explain that. Now, which is harder to do, to submit to somebody or to love as Christ loved?
Mhm.
I would submit to you that the second one is a lot harder than the first one. So let's get off our high horses that you shouldn't be submissive, because it says later that we should submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So
Yeah.
the submission goes both ways, but the man has an additional job, and that is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. And that is very, very difficult at times.
Mhm.
Because let me tell you something, ladies, you're hard to live with sometimes. In case nobody told you that, you're very difficult creatures to understand. And so when we as men even navigate that, like, that's no disrespect. We just have to understand, okay, there's things we don't understand. We got to push through anyway. But our job is not to come in and wield an iron fist. Is to come in and love you as Christ loved the church, which he laid his life down. He would do anything for her. And that's what I would do for my wife. And I hope that the men would also do it for the ladies who are listening.
Yeah, I really do believe that Christ in the center of the marriage is the only hope a marriage really has. If the other person is not a believer, for someone who might be listening right now, you can pray for them. You can pray for your husband or your wife, and God can move in that marriage and win them. But without Christ in the center, it's very, very difficult. The world's going to throw so many things at us already, and when you don't have that rock in the center to cling to when those storms get really heavy, what I've seen is that the submission thing, obviously being around a lot of very independent women, and a lot of my friends are entrepreneurs and all that too. So it comes with a sense of empowerment, right? And you're very fearful to submit to a man. I want to tell you, when I married my husband, which we're going on 8 years together now, I was very, very, very independent, and it was difficult for me to submit. It was difficult for me to trust. I think that's what it comes down to for a lot of the women is the trust factor. If I leave my job to stay home, or if I move to a different area, maybe near in his area where he grew up, and I give up, my comfort zone. If I do all these things, what if it turns out bad? What if he turns out to be not a good guy? All these things. So the first thing I would say is pray for God to bring you the right partner. If you don't already have a partner in your life, let God put it together. Don't get impatient because we're lonely and choose poorly. I'm the poster child for that. And then when you do have that wonderful man that comes into your life, don't make him pay for all the mistakes, that came before him. And I think that submission becomes easier when that trust is increased, and that increases when Christ is in the center. And then it is easier to submit because he's going to make the best decision for the family, make the best decision for you. Men are so much more logical, and they can, we do make emotional decisions as women, and we need that man that's going to be, he's not void of emotion, but he's just a little more stable when it comes to making the right decision. And I think that's the key to it, just from what I've seen, is that trust. And then being willing to let him be the decision maker in the house. We can trust him to do that because we know he's getting his wisdom from God.
Well, the most important decision any human will ever make in their entire life is the choice of a mate.
Yeah.
That's it. That choice affects every single other part of your life, where you live, who your family members are, who your friends are, how healthy you'll be to a certain degree, what you do for fun, where you go on vacations.
Yeah.
All of that is affected by that single decision. And, Diane, that sometimes that decision can lead in a wrong direction, and we got to make better decisions. And then speaking of decisions, you said there in your comments about allowing the husband to be the decision maker. And here's the interesting thing about that is that in a good, healthy marriage, that should be true. There's got to be, just like in any business, there's got to be one person that's responsible for making decisions. If you have two, you're always going to have a problem.
Right.
So in a marriage, you have one person who's responsible for making decisions. But here's the interesting thing about that. Let's pretend that there's 4 people in a car, a man, a wife, and 2 kids in the back seat. And we're driving somewhere and we say, where do you guys want to eat for dinner? Everybody's gone through this experience.
Right.
And the daughter in the back seat says, well, she wants pizza. The son says he wants tacos. The wife says she wants fried chicken. And the husband wants hamburgers. All right, what decision gets made? Do you always go eat hamburgers because that's what he wants? No.
Right.
What ends up happening most often, the husband will acquiesce to someone else's choice, and that's still his decision.
Yes.
He still made the decision.
That's so good.
But somebody else made the choice. And that's what a good husband does. And are there times we go get burgers? Absolutely. Because you know what? I want burgers. We can't decide we're going to burgers. But if that happens every time, you're not a decision maker. You're a dictator.
That's right.
And there's a very big difference. So when women hear the submit thing, they think they have to submit to a dictator. No. You should not submit to a dictator. You submit to a decision maker who has your best interests at heart.
Yeah. In the workplace, the men that are serving God, they are very traditional in their thought process. I will say conservative. They are, their values are very important to them in the workplace. How are they navigating it when they're working with people who have polar opposite values and polar opposite outlook on the world, worldviews? How are the men doing that in the workplace?
Well, I think as an employee, I don't know. I mean, the last time I was an employee, I was a school teacher in a state-run school, public school, and I still did my thing, right? I didn't break rules just to prove that I followed Christ. But, I remember the first year that I ever taught school, I taught in inner city in Nashville. And for Christmas that year, I bought all of my students it was a New Testament, but it looked like a magazine. So they're really cool. I don't remember what they were called. It's been a long time ago, but it looked like a magazine. And it looked like a teenager's magazine, but it was the New Testament. And I gave every single one of my students one, and I thought it was awesome. Okay, so there's no rule against a teacher giving a gift to a student, not at least that I'm aware of, unless they've changed the law since then. But so I did that. Nobody said a thing until the teachers union rep came to sign me up for the teachers union. And I said, no, thank you. I'm not interested in your union. And then she said, yeah, but I know you gave Bibles to everybody for Christmas. What happens if somebody complains about it? I said, I'll deal with it. I was something before I was a teacher. I'll be something after I'm not a teacher.
Good for you.
And she never said anything else to me after that. Good. But I think what we need to do is just be bold, but don't be a jerk. Don't be a goody two shoes, because I've seen too many of those people. Yeah. And those people, even though we claim the same Christ and we're brothers or sisters, like, you can make me sick. I'm not interested in you because you're making all of the rest of us look bad. Because you're a goody two shoes. So just be bold about who you are. Show up as you are. Now, as the entrepreneur, as the leader of the business, you obviously have a lot more leeway to do things. So, I mean, when I hire people, I let them know, hey, this is who I am, and these are some things that I do. Just letting you know. I don't have to ask them any questions. I just let them know, and they're like, okay, whatever, that's cool. And that way, there's no surprises later. I don't make anybody do anything who works for me that they're not comfortable doing. But what's interesting, Diane, is that in my mastermind, we have people from all walks of life, all over the country. But what's interesting to me is that most of them have the same kind of bend on how they see the world and politics. And not all are followers of Christ. That would be way too much for me to say that. As a matter of fact, I've had at least one atheist who's been a part of it. But I think but we're all kind of the same. So what does that mean? That means we attract who we are. Even though I never say anything about politics or religion in any of our promotions publicly. I mean, doing a podcast like this might be the only time I ever talk about it, but it's not on the website. It's not in any of our materials. It doesn't really show up in my social media, but yet the people who come in, they're kind of the same. And then interesting, not all of them, but most of them are. And I had one funny story. I'll tell this story. I think you'll find this really interesting. I had a guy who was a very successful dentist in another state, which shall remain nameless. And he had reached out to me, and he was interested in our mastermind because he wanted some help, redesigning the business so it didn't take so much of his time. And as dentists, they got to be there all the time. And he was really interested. And the last thing he said is like, I would really like to talk to one of your members, just about their experience. And I don't normally, allow that because I don't want my members being bothered.
Yeah.
It's not about, not having testimonials. It's just I don't want them to be bothered. But I acquiesced and said, okay. And I called one of my members who was very active at the time, and I said, "Hey, would you mind having a call with this guy?" And this guy ran a construction company, very successful construction company, and they had their call. And then later, I called my prospect back and said, "Hey, did you talk to so and so, and how did that go?" And he said, "After talking to so and so, I don't think I'm interested." And I said, "Oh, really? That's a very big change from where we were at last time we spoke." And he said, "Well, here's the thing." He goes, "I'm Catholic, my wife's Jewish, and everybody's got their own things, and but the so and so that you had me talk to had his Trump flag hanging in the office behind him, and if that's who you have in your club and that's what you stand for, I'm not interested."
Oh, boy.
And I was absolutely shocked. I said, "First of all, doctor, that ain't my Trump flag. I don't have one.
Right.
You can see in my office, I don't have one. I don't own one."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Second of all, you're the one that is putting restrictions on people, not me.
Right.
So if you say you don't want to join, don't you look at this and blame me for not wanting you, because this ain't a me problem. This is a you problem." And I was polite to him, but I'd let him know in no uncertain terms that this ain't a me problem. This is a you problem.
Right.
And so if you want to be bigoted, because that's what that is,
Yeah.
against people who believe something you don't believe or voted for somebody you don't vote for, so be it. That's the only time that's ever happened. It's
Wow.
in the years I've been doing this, it's the only time it ever happened. And good riddance, whatever.
That's the nice part about entrepreneurship too, is you don't have to deal with people you don't want to deal with. But you're so right. I think that boldness is so needed right now. This is something that I just talk about all the time on my podcast, is we just have to be bold and take that stand. Doesn't mean we have to be ugly. In fact, we shouldn't be ugly. We're ambassadors for Christ, but we should be able to open our mouth and say what needs to be said in that moment. I always say to the ladies that I coach is, before you say it, just say, "God, give me the words." Just so it, we take that pause to make sure that we're not reacting, we're responding, not reacting. But I think that boldness is what's missing, not only in the workplace, but certainly in our homes and in our neighborhoods and all these. If we would just open our mouths, there's so many women for sure. And that's what I was wondering, kind of that's what I'm trying to get at in this podcast, is I'm wondering if it's happening with the men too. So many women will just opt out of the tough, uncomfortable conversations or things that need to be said because they just don't want to rock the boat. They just don't want to get into, they don't want to create any kind of tension. So I wonder if that's happening in the workplace. And obviously I know you're dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs. So how are they navigating that, with people who come on with all these different ideologies, people right out of college and all this, they're coming right out of these, what I call indoctrination camps, and so, yes, I think you're right. People do gravitate toward people that they have things in common with. And I think just entrepreneurship in general it will definitely give you a meritocracy worldview as opposed to, going and being, a cog in a wheel kind of position. But I just wonder, is this happening with the men too?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it's the same, but yes, it's happening. But I would say that most entrepreneurs, especially the men, as we were talking about them, they are of a different ilk anyway. They're a little bit more alpha. They're more out front, going to lead. And I also think that most, at least the ones that I work with, are not easily offended. And we give the same leeway to other people that we prefer for ourselves. So let's say, just for the sake of this conversation and this show, that I'm a conservative Christian entrepreneur leading the business. And I want to be able to exercise those values and worldviews and political ideologies freely without anybody, impeding on that, impeding that. Well, if I want that, then it stands to reason I should allow the same for somebody who doesn't do the same thing as me. So if I get a leftist to come in who's a Buddhist or whatever, just the antithesis of I need to have the same respect for their position as I would want them to have for me. Now, but because I'm the owner of the business, like I get to make these are my rules.
Yes.
I get to so if we have a meal as a group, as an employee, and I say a prayer and I say in Jesus' name, you come to me and say, well, I want to do one in Buddha's name. No, that's
No.
not how this operates. You do your thing, but this is my company.
Yeah.
Right? And if I was an employee working for a Muslim or working for a Jew or working for a Taoist or working for a Hindu, and they did something like that, who am I to say, you can't do that? It's my turn to pray in Jesus' name. No, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
And that's where I think in the school systems and in our fight for, putting the Bible back and all that stuff. I follow Christ, have my whole life. There's no way I'd ever try to, remove him from anything. But we also have to realize that a lot of these people in the schools, if we say there's got to be complete freedom of X when in regard to prayer, Bibles, or religion, that also means that you're allowing the same leeway for the people who don't believe what you believe. So if you got somebody who comes in who's a Muslim and you say, well, all teachers can now lead prayers in their classes. Well, does that mean you're going to you want your kid sitting in a classroom with a Muslim leading it, or a Taoist or Hindu, or we got to think through the unintended consequences of things that we're fighting for. So I think going back to my comment earlier, normalization of our faith, not trying to stand out in the crowd necessarily, but normalization and the total intertwining of that into everything that we do, I think will speak much more volumes than waving a flag and say, this is what I am, and you got to be with me or you're off the team. It's a fine line to walk, but I think most of us on this side, where you and I are, I know most of us, Diane, aren't thinking about the natural consequences, the unintended consequences of some of the things we're pushing for.
Yeah. I will just, as we start to wrap up here, I will just say one thing on that, though. I always held that worldview just till recently. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I know our legislators are putting the 10 Commandments back in schools and all that. And there's, of course, the comments, well, if you're going to allow that, then you need to allow this, and this. And I was thinking, I've done a lot of study on the fact that our nation was absolutely inspired by, rooted in Judeo-Christian values. Not a buffet of religions, but in Christianity. It informed and shaped our government structure. So I think one of the things that's missing in the schools is trying to teach government apart from that structure, that moral structure, is incomplete teaching. So I think teaching Christianity side by side with how our government was created is only right. It's the wholeness of that education. And I think that might trump the argument of, well, we have to allow all these others. Now, prayer, things like that, that's a different,
Right.
that what you're saying is right. I mean, we certainly don't want to open that up. But there was a time when prayer and all of that was very normal in schools. Sermons were on the front pages of newspapers and all that. So I would personally love to see us return to that, because that's what our country was founded in. But I understand your point too. And it is a lot to think you can't just make laws without considering all these things. And you're absolutely right about that.
Well, it's a nuanced discussion, because if you say, okay, we're going to go back to the absolute foundation of the Judeo-Christian worldview that this was founded on, and the Christian principles. And I actually, on one of my podcasts, Chisel and Compass, we did a whole show on, is America a Christian nation? And we talked at length about that. And actually, through the process of studying for that, it changed my perspective on everything. But the nuance is, if we're going to go back to the foundation, then we promote and we do the foundation, and that is the rule of the day. And we allow other things in other venues, but not here. We go back to the Judeo-Christian views, which means that the 10 Commandments are displayed, that the Bible is revered not only as a document for religious study, but also a document for scholarly and historical study. That's one thing. But if we just go, then here's where the nuance is, and say, well, there's freedom of religion. We should be able to all pray in schools. And if you're Taoist, you do it. If you're Hindu, you do it. Okay, well, hold on now. That's a completely different conversation than the one we were just talking about.
It is. Yeah, it really is very dangerous. And we all can't just coexist. I mean, I always say America is a funnel, not a melting pot. The idea was you come from other nations and then you assimilate. That's the idea. But not just set up all these subcultures within our culture. Then America has no identity anymore. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that playing out. And it's so dangerous. That's probably a whole other podcast we can have for another day.
For sure.
Yeah, but I just want to give you the last word, and I so appreciate you coming on. Your wisdom and your insight has been really invaluable today. What would you like to leave ladies with? One last thought on behalf of men. What is something else that we need to be aware of or mindful of going forward?
One of the things that I learned from my mentor a few years ago is that if we're not experiencing success in any area of life, whether it's relationships, such as a marriage relationship, finances, business, you just name it. If you're not experiencing success, the hindrance that's keeping you from that success will be one of two things or both. And that's lack of trust or lack of discipline. And that's it. And so if you look at any area of life, health, finances, relationships, business, and you say, well, I'm not succeeding the way I want. You start tracing that down, and it'll be one of those two things, if not both. So in a relationship, is it lack of trust that's causing the hindrance to the success? Maybe. Is it lack of discipline? Perhaps. What about in business? If you're not succeeding the way you want to succeed in business, which of the two or both is it? That is a universal law that applies in every situation for millennia, going backwards and forwards. And so my parting word would be analyze where you're not succeeding and figure out which one is it and how do you fix that? Because it could be lack of trust in yourself as much as it's lack of trust in the other person. And maybe it's lack of discipline organizationally as much as it's lack of discipline on you individually. So think about that.
That's so good. So good. Thank you so much, Jason. Ladies, if you would like to learn more about him, maybe also share with your husbands all of this great work that he does to propel businesses forward, please go to therealjasonduncan.com, therealjasonduncan.com. I really appreciate you coming on, my friend. Thank you so much for your wisdom today.
Thank you.